My name is Daniel, and I never imagined that at 35 years old, the fiercest battle I'd ever fight wouldn't be in the boardroom or in the cutthroat world of tech startups. It would be inside my own family's dining room. For 15 years, I gave everything I had to the industry, working endless nights, bleeding through deadlines, and clawing my way from nothing into something that mattered. Each milestone along that path I celebrated not with champagne or parties, but with machines' 10 rare classic cars. Together, those 10 vehicles are worth about $1.5 million. But to me, they're worth more than any number a banker could write on a check. They are living, gleaming milestones of sacrifice and survival. And yet in one evening, my parents tried to erase it all. It started with a dinner invitation that felt routine, the kind you accept without hesitation. But as soon as I sat down at the table, I realized this wasn't dinner, it was an ambush. My father cleared his throat with that old business tone he used whenever he wanted obedience. My mother's eyes glittered with excitement, like they had already won a battle I didn't know I was fighting. And then came the words that made the room tilt beneath me. Daniel, it's time to sell your car collection. Every one of them. Your sister deserves a home, and you're the one who can provide it. At first I thought I misheard. Sell my cars, all of them. For a house that would be in Natalie's name, not mine. I stared at them fork, suspended halfway to my mouth, pulse thundering in my ears. 15 years of sacrifice packaged neatly into brochures laid across the table by a real estate agent they'd already hired, meant to vanish so my unemployed sister could play house. The shock cracked something inside me. I tried to laugh to pass it off as some bizarre misunderstanding. But my father only leaned forward, voice cold, and certain family comes first, always. That's when I realized it wasn't a suggestion, it was an expectation. As his words sank in, the garage flashed in my mind. The Mustang I restored as a tribute to my grandfather, the Porsche I dragged out of a barn and brought back to life with my own hands, the Lamborghini that roared the same week I signed my company's biggest deal. To anyone else, they might look like metal and leather. To me, they are the very chapters of my story, each one carved with sweat and fear and triumph. And my family wanted me to erase all of it, just to prop up someone who had never carried her own weight a single day in her life. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My parents' eyes were steady, certain, already convinced. My sister's smirk told me she'd been promised the prize before I even arrived, and I realized something dark. They weren't asking me to help. They were telling me I owed them, that I owed her. I gripped my water glass knuckles, whitening, and thought, is this what family means? That everything I built can be stripped away because someone else doesn't want to build their own life? That night, staring across the table at the people who raised me, I felt both betrayed and awakened. I knew in that instant that this wouldn't end with a polite refusal. This was the beginning of a war over my very right to keep what I had bled for. And here's the truth: if you've ever stood up for something you love, whether it's your dream, your career, or just the principle that no one has the right to take what you've earned, you'll understand the fire that started burning in my chest that night. This is the story of how I ended up moving 10 rare cars in the middle of the night like a fugitive, how my family nearly destroyed me, and how against all odds, it forced the one person I least expected to finally grow up. I wish I could tell you I brushed off that dinner, that I went home, laughed about it, and carried on with my life. But the truth is, I didn't sleep that night. My parents' words looped in my head like a broken record. Sell your cars. Provide for your sister. Family comes first. Every syllable dug into me, as if what I had built, what I had bled for, was suddenly meaningless. By the time dawn crept through my blinds, I realized this wasn't just about cars. It was about control. It was about a family that believed my success was theirs to spend. The next evening, I stood in my garage, surrounded by chrome and leather, the air still thick with the scent of motor oil. I ran my hands over the hood of the Mustang, the first car I'd restored after closing a major client. My grandfather used to say that every engine told a story. You just had to listen. As I listened to the silence, I wondered, would my family ever understand the story these cars told about me, or would they only ever see dollar signs and property listings? That's when I knew I had to tell this story, not just for myself, but for anyone who's ever been told to give up something sacred for someone else's convenience. Because maybe you've been there too. Maybe you've had people look at what you've built and say, It's nice, but now give it to us. And before I go further, let me ask you something. Have you ever had to fight for something you love, even when everyone else told you to let it go? If you have, drop a comment below and tell me your story. And if you believe people deserve to stand tall for what they've earned, hit that like button and subscribe. This channel is about stories that matter, stories that remind us we're not alone. The irony is, my love for cars didn't even come from my parents. It came from the man they rarely mentioned, my grandfather. He owned a tiny repair shop in a forgotten corner of Michigan. Every Saturday, while other kids played soccer or begged their parents for trips to the mall, I begged, for one thing, a ride to Grandpa's shop. That garage smelled like gasoline and dust. The sound of wrenches clanging against engines was like music to me. Grandpa never treated me like a child in there. He handed me tools, trusted me to hold a flashlight. Steady explained why every bolt mattered. And then, one afternoon, when I was just 8, he lifted me into the driver's seat of a '65 Mustang he was restoring. My feet couldn't even touch the pedals, but my hands gripped the wheel, and I swear to you, it felt like holding the future. By the time I turned 16, Grandpa and I bought a battered '90 Ford Taurus. Most kids my age wanted shiny new cars. I wanted something broken, something I could fix. That Taurus was rust and rattles barely running. But for 6 months we poured ourselves into it. We bled knuckles, stained shirts, and filled nights with grease and laughter. When the engine finally roared back to life, I promised myself one day I'd own a collection. Not just any collection, but one earned with sweat nights without sleep and risks no one else believed I should take. That promise became the fire that carried me through college. While my parents rolled their eyes at my choice to study computer science, "It's just a trend," my dad sneered. "No husband will want a woman in tech." My mom sighed. I signed loan papers and stacked part-time jobs. My roommates thought I was insane for coding until sunrise. But every late night I remembered that Mustang's steering wheel in my hands, and I kept going. Looking back, that was the seed of everything. Every sacrifice, every step forward, every car in my garage today traces back to that shop that tore us that promise. And maybe that's why my parents' demand felt like betrayal on a level deeper than money. They weren't just asking me to sell assets, they were asking me to erase the story that made me who I am. But what they didn't know was that erasing that story was impossible, because it wasn't just written in metal and paint, it was written in me. When I think back to the earliest roots of this obsession, it always takes me to one place, my grandfather's garage. That dim little shop, tucked behind his farmhouse, smelled like a mix of oil, old leather, and summer dust. To anyone else, it looked cluttered, maybe even run down. To me, it was a cathedral. I was 8 years old the day he let me climb into the driver's seat of a half-restored '65 Mustang. The cracked leather stuck to the back of my legs, and the steering wheel was so big I could barely hold it steady. My feet dangled above the pedals, useless. But in that moment, none of it mattered. My grandfather's smile told me I belonged there. One day he said, tightening a bolt under the hood, "This car will roar again, and so will you." I didn't fully understand what he meant, but the words burned themselves into me. Most kids my age were outside riding bikes or glued to cartoons. Me, I was begging to hand Grandpa wrenches, fascinated by the clang of tools and the hum of engines. I memorized the sound of a socket wrench, clicking the way his hands, rough and scarred, moved with such certainty. He treated every piece of machinery like it carried a soul. That lesson stuck. Machines weren't just things. They carried stories, scars, victories. By the time I turned 16, Grandpa and I found a wreck of a car, a '90 Ford Taurus, with more rust than paint. Most teenagers would have laughed or cried if their first car looked like that. Not me. I saw possibility. I saw a challenge waiting to be conquered. Together, we stripped it down week after week, my knuckles scraped raw, my clothes ruined. We replaced belts, patched leaks, argued over carburetors. The neighbors thought we were crazy. But the night that Taurus finally roared back to life, I felt something I can't quite describe, like the sound of destiny shaking off the dust. I promised myself then and there one day I would have a collection. Not a gift, not a hand-me-down. A fleet of cars I had earned, each representing a mountain I had climbed. That promise became the compass for my life. When college came, I chased computer science not because it was easy, but because it was hard, because it was mine. My father sneered at the choice, calling it a fad. My mother wrung her hands, warning no man would want a woman buried in code. But I remembered that promise in the garage, the smell of oil and dust, the weight of that Mustang wheel. I signed the loan papers anyway. Those 4 years nearly broke me. I juggled 2 part-time jobs, stayed awake, coding until dawn, ran on cheap coffee and sheer stubbornness. My roommates rolled their eyes when I taped wiring diagrams above my bed. But whenever doubt crept in, I pictured that Mustang quiet, in my grandfather's shop, waiting to roar again. It reminded me what I was fighting for. What my family never realized was that cars weren't just hobbies. They were anchors. They tied me to the only person in my family who believed in me. Every scrape of metal, every engine rebuilt, reminded me of a truth my parents never said out loud, that I didn't belong to their vision of what a daughter should be. I was meant for something else. So when my father later dismissed my collection as toys sitting in a garage, when my mother brushed off my milestones as distractions from settling down, they didn't just insult my passion. They insulted the very foundation of who I am. And maybe that's why their demand at that family dinner hit me so hard. They weren't just asking me to sell cars, they were asking me to sell the story of a little girl who once sat in a Mustang and promised herself she'd never give up. That's the story I carry into every boardroom, every late-night coding session, every mile I've driven since. And it's why I knew deep down I could never let them take it away. At 16, when most of my classmates were obsessing over prom dates and driver's licenses, I was standing in my grandfather's garage staring at that battered Ford Taurus we'd resurrected from the dead. The paint was still dull, the seats torn, the engine barely cooperative, but it ran. And in that moment, as its shaky rumble filled the air, I felt unstoppable. I can still hear my grandfather's laugh, warm and proud, echoing against the metal walls. "You did it, kid," he said, wiping grease from his hands. "You brought it back." I grinned so wide my face hurt. It wasn't just a car, it was proof. Proof that with patience, sweat, and stubbornness, I could take something broken and breathe life back into it. Proof that I didn't need anyone else to hand me success. I could build it myself. That night, leaning against the hood, I whispered a promise to myself. One day I'll have a collection, not 1 or 2 cars, a fleet. Each one will stand for a battle I fought and won. It wasn't a dream in the way other teenagers dreamed. It was a vow. Of course, if my parents had overheard me, they would have rolled their eyes. To them, cars were money pits, machines to get from point A to point B, nothing more. They couldn't understand why I wanted to sink hours into rusty bolts instead of sports or dances. But Grandpa understood. And more importantly, I understood. That vow carried me through every obstacle that followed. When I applied for computer science programs, and my father scoffed, "Technology won't last. It's a fad," I thought of that Taurus. When my mother fretted that no man would want me if I was buried in code instead of homemaking, I thought of the Mustang's wheel in my hands at 8 years old. Every sneer, every doubt became fuel. Because I'd already proven once that I could fix the unfixable. Why should my life be any different? College tested that promise more than anything before. Working 2 part-time jobs while dragging myself through algorithms at 3 in the morning felt impossible some nights. I remember collapsing at my desk, coffee gone cold, wondering if it was worth it. Then I'd close my eyes and see that garage. Hear the Taurus's engine sputter back to life, and I'd keep typing, keep grinding. When I landed my first job at a tiny startup, I celebrated not with champagne, but with dreams of my first real collector car. The pay was lousy, but the experience was gold. I absorbed everything software operations strategy. Every late night at that startup, I was inching closer to the day my promise would become reality. It wasn't glamorous. My first apartment had peeling paint and a couch I found on the curb. Dinner was instant noodles and frozen pizza. But every sacrifice felt like an investment. Each time I turned down an invitation or worked through a weekend, I whispered to myself, "One day, the garage will be full. One day, this will be worth it." And when I finally founded my own software company at 27, converting my tiny living room into an office, that promise burned hotter than ever. Each milestone, first client, first big deal, first major investor, wasn't just a professional achievement. It was another marker for the future garage I'd been building in my mind since I was 16. That's the thing about a vow made in grease-stained clothes standing beside a half-dead Taurus, it doesn't fade. It burrows into you. It becomes the voice that won't let you quit the compass that points forward when everything else pushes back. So yes, when my parents sat me down years later and told me to sell everything to liquidate the story I'd spent decades writing, it wasn't just insulting. It was an attempt to shatter a promise I'd been keeping since I was a teenager, with dirt under her nails and fire in her chest. And I knew with absolute certainty I could never let that happen. If the promise I made at 16 was the spark, college was the furnace that tried to burn it out of me. My parents never believed in that path. My father dismissed computer science as a fad. Learn something practical, he barked. Teaching or nursing, that's what lasts. My mother worried about appearances. Men don't marry women who live behind computer screens. But I was done bending myself into their narrow vision of my life. So I signed the loan papers, stacked part-time jobs, and dove into the grind. 2 shifts at the diner, 1 at the campus library, and nights swallowed whole by lines of code. I remember walking across campus under flickering street lamps at 2:00 a.m., my breath fogging in the Michigan winter fingers, aching from typing all night. My friends thought I was reckless, maybe even delusional. But every time I thought about quitting, I pictured that garage, my grandfather's steady hands, the roar of that Taurus, and I kept going. 4 years later, diploma in hand, I thought the worst was behind me. I was wrong. My first job was at a struggling startup in a crumbling office park. The ceiling tiles stained the carpet, smelling of mildew. My paycheck barely covered rent. The hours brutal, but every ounce of it was fuel. I soaked up everything I could. Product design, client pitches, the ugly mechanics of survival in the tech world. My boss David became a mentor. He saw potential in me even when I doubted myself. Within 3 years, I had climbed 2 promotions and helped the company land its first major client. That deal felt like oxygen after years of drowning. But with it came the question that had been haunting me: am I really building someone else's dream forever? At 27, I jumped, quit the job, cleared out my tiny apartment living room and filled it with folding tables, secondhand monitors, and an idea that wouldn't leave me alone: a CRM platform tailored for auto repair shops. The inspiration was obvious: Grandpa's shop, the stacks of paperwork, the missed calls, the constant chaos. I knew I could build something better. The first year nearly broke me. I lived off ramen and instant coffee, my couch doubling as a bed. Days blurred into nights as I coded until my wrists burned. But little by little, the work paid off. 3 employees turned into 15, 1 client turned into 30, then 50, then national contracts. By year 5, we had over 150 employees and clients across the country. The day I sold 30% of the company to investors was surreal. The zeros on that wire transfer didn't feel real, like Monopoly money glowing on a screen. But it wasn't the money that mattered. It was the validation that every sacrifice, the loans, the missed parties, the lonely nights had meant something. And of course, with each milestone, I kept my vow. After landing our first major corporate client, I bought a '67 Mustang, the twin of the one Grandpa restored. After closing my first 7-figure deal, I tracked down a '74 Jaguar E-Type British Racing Green, a car that made my heart pound just to look at it. Then came the Porsche 911 Carrera RS, pulled from a dusty barn and brought back to life piece by piece. Each car wasn't just a purchase, it was a marker, a chapter. Proof that I was still keeping the promise made in grease and rust all those years ago. Sometimes I'd stand in the garage after a long day at the office, running my hand over polished chrome, remembering every step it took to get there. The failures, the fear, the voice of my father telling me it wouldn't last, the silence of my mother waiting for me to come to my senses. And always the echo of my own promise, one day a fleet. That day had come, and I thought I'd finally outrun the doubt. What I didn't know then was that my success, instead of inspiring pride in my family, would only sharpen their resentment. My garage, the place where I saw stories and sacrifice, they saw as nothing more than cash waiting to be spent. And when they decided it was time for me to cash out for my sister's sake, they weren't asking, they were demanding. By the time my company had scaled to 150 employees, the garage I once dreamed of was no longer a fantasy, it was a reality. But let me tell you something, that those 10 cars weren't just machines. They were living chapters of my life, each one carrying scars of a battle I'd fought, each one echoing a promise I'd made to myself years earlier in my grandfather's shop. The first cornerstone of that promise was the 1967 Ford Mustang. I found it at an estate sale when I was 28, right after landing our first major corporate client. The car was neglected, its paint dull, its engine coughing like a dying animal. Most people walked past it, but I saw my grandfather's hands tightening bolts, his voice telling me one day this car will roar again. Restoring it wasn't easy. I spent months under the hood, cutting my knuckles, cursing at seized bolts. But when that engine finally thundered to life, it wasn't just metal reviving. It was memory. It was legacy. Next came the 1974 Jaguar E-Type British racing green, sleek and powerful. I bought it to mark my first seven-figure deal. The first time I drove it along the coastal roads, the V12 roaring. I caught my own reflection in the mirror and thought, this is how far you've come. From ramen noodles to this. That car wasn't a toy, it was a reminder of survival. But perhaps the most symbolic was the 1973 Porsche 911 Carrera RS. I found it abandoned in a barn covered in dust forgotten. Everyone else had given up on it, but I saw what it could be. Over 18 months, I worked alongside a restoration specialist crawling under its belly, sanding, polishing, replacing, learning. When it finally roared back to life, the sound shook me. It wasn't just a car reborn, it was me. It represented all the times people wrote me off, all the times I refused to stay down. And then there was the Mercedes-Benz 300 SL Gullwing Recreation, bought in honor of a business milestone that once felt impossible. The Ferrari 328 GTS I won at a charity auction, the prize of a gamble I almost didn't take. The 1963 Chevrolet Corvette Stingray split window with its sharp design, reminding me of the sharp risks I had taken. The Aston Martin DB5 restored piece by piece, as elegant as it was relentless. The BMW M1 rare and temperamental, a perfect metaphor for the early days of managing a company. The Lamborghini Countach, outrageous and bold, celebrating the moment I stopped apologizing for my success. And finally, the 1992 Dodge Viper RT10, a beast of American muscle standing for grit and defiance. Each weekend, while executives chased golf games and vacations, I rolled up my sleeves and worked on these cars. The smell of oil, the scrape of tools, the hum of engines, they were therapy. They were a sanctuary from the relentless pressure of boardrooms and quarterly reports. These cars weren't status symbols. They were my story carved in steel. I wasn't alone in that passion either. Joining a local car club gave me a second family one that actually understood me. Jackson, my go-to restoration expert, taught me skills I never even knew existed. Sophia, a brilliant photographer, captured my collection in ways that turned metal into art. Together, we even organized charity car shows, raising scholarships for women in STEM, a way to give back, to weave my story into something bigger. Standing in that garage, I often thought, this is peace. The Jaguar's lines glinting under the lights, the Corvette's chrome polished to perfection, the Porsche crouched like a predator. Every curve reminded me of sacrifices, every roar reminded me of victories. These weren't just vehicles, they were my anchor, my diary, my soul spelled out in chrome and gasoline. And that's why the moment my parents called them just cars, just toys sitting in a garage, I felt something break inside me. They weren't just dismissing objects, they were dismissing me. They were dismissing every sleepless night, every scar, every ounce of determination. If you've ever built something from nothing, you know what I mean. You know how it feels when someone waves it off as frivolous, like it's disposable. That sting doesn't fade, it hardens you. So when my parents later demanded I liquidate all of it for Natalie's fresh start, they weren't just asking me to give up cars. They were asking me to erase myself. And I knew then, with crystal clarity, this wasn't just a family dispute. This was a battle for my identity. If my garage told the story of grit, sacrifice, and milestones earned, then my sister Natalie's life told the exact opposite story. She was 7 years younger than me, the baby of the family, and from the moment she was born, our parents wrapped her in a bubble of indulgence. When I was a kid, I had to earn my allowance by mowing lawns, shoveling snow, or scrubbing floors. Natalie. She got hers just for existing. I saved for months to buy a secondhand bike. Natalie mentioned she liked her friend's shiny new one, and a week later it appeared in our driveway wrapped in a bow. The double standard wasn't subtle, it was glaring. I still remember when she borrowed my camera at 16, dropped it, and shattered the lens. Instead of asking her to take responsibility, my parents turned on me. You should have been more careful about where you left it. When she raided my closet, returned clothes stained with makeup, I was scolded for not being more generous. Sharing, they said, was what sisters did. But what they meant was, Natalie doesn't face consequences. Ever. That pattern bled into adulthood. While I clawed my way through student loans, sleepless nights, and 3 part-time jobs to pay tuition, Natalie breezed into college fully funded by our parents. They dipped into retirement savings so she could attend debt-free, a luxury I never even dreamed of. She switched majors 3 times, finally settling on communications before dropping out altogether. And when she walked away junior year, no one scolded her. No one questioned it. She's just finding herself, Mom said. Dad shrugged. Not everyone's as driven as you. Driven. The word came out of his mouth like an insult. After quitting college, Natalie floated from job to job like a leaf in the wind. Barista for 6 months quit because mornings were too early. Retail quit after a fight with her manager. Receptionist lasted 3 weeks. Social media manager gone in 2 months. Every job ended with tears, excuses, or both. And in between, she traveled. Photos of beaches, cocktails, designer outfits appeared on her social media while her credit card debt mounted. I'd visit her apartment furnished with pieces that belonged in luxury magazines. Her closet groaned under the weight of tags I couldn't believe she'd paid for. When I asked how she afforded it, she smiled vaguely. Credit cards, a generous friend, sometimes relationships. Translation, someone else always footed the bill. And through it all, our parents cheered her on. She's just young, Mom would insist. She has a free spirit. Dad would sigh, muttering, not everyone has to be so serious like you. It didn't matter that I was building a company from scratch, employing dozens of people, or pouring everything into my dream. My milestones were brushed aside as expected. Meanwhile, Natalie's recklessness was romanticized as adventure. But here's what cut the deepest. Despite her recklessness, I still tried to help. When she maxed out credit cards at 22, I paid off $10,000, begging her to be more careful. She promised she would. 6 months later, she was back in debt. When she needed a car for interviews, I lent her my BMW. It came back littered with trash and an empty gas tank. When she needed a place to live, I covered her deposit and first month's rent. 3 months later, she was being evicted for non-payment while posting vacation pictures from Las Vegas. Each time I told myself maybe this time she'd turn a corner. Each time I was wrong. My help became her excuse not to change. And yet to my parents, this wasn't indulgence, it was loyalty. To them, I was the one failing at family duty when I got frustrated. My sacrifices were invisible. Natalie's failures were just part of her journey. That's why years later, when my parents told me to sell my cars for her, it wasn't really about money. It was the culmination of decades of favoritism. To them, Natalie's comfort mattered more than my sweat, my story, my life. Standing in that dining room, looking at my sister's smug smile as she planned how to decorate a house I was supposed to buy her, I realized something bone deep. Natalie wasn't just spoiled. She was entitled. And my parents weren't just blind, they were complicit. And if I didn't draw a line right then, they'd take everything. I'll never forget that night. It was supposed to be a family dinner, just a casual gathering or so I thought. But when I walked into my parents' living room, the air felt heavy staged, like everyone had rehearsed their lines except me. My mother, perched on the edge of the sofa, hands clasped tight in her lap. My father sat in his recliner, that stiff, serious business expression carved into his face. Natalie sat between them, practically glowing with excitement, bouncing her knee like a child about to unwrap a present. And next to her was a stranger, a sharply dressed woman with a leather portfolio on her knees. I froze. What's going on? I asked, scanning their faces. My father cleared his throat. Daniel, this is Teresa Martin. She's a real estate agent. Teresa smiled professional and smooth as she slid brochures across the coffee table. Property listings. My stomach tightened. My mother leaned forward, voice calm but firm. We've been thinking about Natalie's future. She needs stability, a place of her own. somewhere she can finally build a life. I frowned flipping through the glossy photos. Colonial-style homes, 4 bedrooms, spacious yards, price tags brushing $900,000. Natalie beamed as she pointed at one. Look at this one. The basement could be my entertainment space. The office upstairs would be perfect for my home business. And the neighborhood is so exclusive you'll love it. I blinked. You'll love it, as if I were the one moving in. Then my father dropped the bomb. We think you should sell your car collection to buy this house for Natalie. The cars just sit in the garage. This would be an investment in your sister's future. The words hung in the air like a hammer waiting to fall. I laughed sharp bitter. You want me to sell everything, every car I've spent 15 years building, to buy Natalie a house? My mother reached for my hand. Honey, you know how much she's struggled. This would give her stability. You have your condo, your company, you don't need those cars. Natalie leaned in, her eyes wide with fake sincerity. You could always buy more later once I'm on my feet. You could even visit. There's plenty of space. I pulled my hand back. Those cars are not just things. They represent everything I've worked for. Every milestone, every sacrifice. And besides, Natalie's never kept a job longer than a few months. How is she going to pay taxes, utilities, maintenance? My father waved it off. She's interviewing for promising positions. And we'd help with the first few months. Teresa chimed in, her voice smooth. The property is in an excellent school district. It will hold its value. It's truly an investment. I stared at them, stunned. To them, my cars weren't symbols of survival and legacy. They were liquid assets, tools, for Natalie's fresh start. I tried to reason. What if we looked at something more affordable? I could co-sign a lease, help her with job placement, even connect her to my network. Natalie's smile faltered. But I've already started planning the housewarming party. My parents exchanged that look I'd known since childhood, the one that meant I was being difficult. My father's voice turned stern. Daniel, this isn't about a house. This is about family. Family comes first. The implication was crystal clear. If I refused, I was selfish. Choosing objects over my sister. Choosing materialism over blood. The argument spiraled from there. My mother cried, accusing me of forgetting how I was raised. My father called me selfish, blind to what really matters. Natalie pouted like a child denied a toy, acting wounded as though I'd snatched away something she was already owed. Even Teresa, visibly uncomfortable, tried to steer the conversation back to granite countertops and crown molding, as if marble could convince me to erase 15 years of blood and sweat. By the time I walked out, my ears rang with their accusations. Selfish, ungrateful, cold. Driving home, headlights blurring the dark road, I realized something bone deep. This wasn't just a disagreement. This was a siege. They had already decided my future, already promised my sister a home bought with my life's work. And if I didn't draw the line now, they would keep pushing until there was nothing left of me. That night, I stopped being just their son. I became the only defense my story had left. When I left my parents' house that night, I thought the storm might end with a slammed door and a few days of silence. I was wrong. The real storm was only beginning. By the time I got home, my phone was buzzing nonstop. A voicemail from my Aunt Susan Daniel. I can't believe how selfish you've become. After everything your parents sacrificed for your education, this is how you repay them. A text from my cousin Frank. It's just a house, man. Don't be greedy. Family matters more than cars. Each message was like a hammer pounding the same lie into me that I was the villain, the heartless son refusing to help his poor, struggling sister. No one mentioned the loans I paid off myself. No one mentioned the $10,000 I once gave Natalie to clear her credit cards. No one mentioned the deposit and rent I'd covered for her apartment, or the job I'd found her that she quit after 2 months. That part of the story had been conveniently erased. In my family's version, I was just the rich, selfish brother clutching shiny toys while my sister suffered. And Natalie wasted no time. She texted me photos of furniture she wanted to buy for her new house. Designer couches, Italian dining tables, rugs that cost more than some people's cars. She wrote as if the decision had already been made. This would look perfect in the living room. FYI, closing costs are higher than expected, so selling sooner is better. The audacity was breathtaking. Even Teresa, the real estate agent, called me. Twice. Her voice was smooth, rehearsed. I understand this is emotional, but we have a motivated seller and an incredible investment opportunity. If you'd like, I can connect you with collectors interested in purchasing the cars as a lot, quick, easy, no hassle. I nearly dropped the phone. To her, my collection was just inventory. To my family, it was currency. To me, it was life. The pressure was suffocating. Every day brought new texts, calls, voicemails. My father's voice grew sharper, my mother's guilt trips heavier. Natalie played both sides one day. She'd send sweet messages dripping with false gratitude. The next, she'd curse me out for ruining her life. I tried to focus on work, but even there, shadows followed. Extended relatives messaged me on LinkedIn, slyly mentioning the situation at home, as if they were entitled to weigh in on decisions about my property. I'd step into my garage late at night, just to breathe, running my hands over polished chrome, reminding myself these weren't toys. They were my chapters, my milestones, the story of everything I'd fought for. But even in that sanctuary, I couldn't shake the dread. Because here's the thing, my family wasn't just pushing. They were planning. I could feel it. In their minds, the house was already Natalie's. They were just waiting for me to crack. And maybe you've been there too. Maybe you've had people circle around you like vultures, convinced that what you built belongs to them, not you. Maybe you've felt that isolation, that gnawing sense that even your victories can be stolen. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been painted as the villain, just for protecting what you earned? Share your story, and if you've ever felt that kind of pressure, make sure you hit subscribe. We're building a place where stories like ours aren't silenced. We're saying no is not selfish, it's survival. Because as the days passed, I knew one thing for certain: they weren't going to stop. They had convinced themselves I owed them. And when people convince themselves of that, they'll cross any line. The real question wasn't if they'd push further, it was how far they'd go. And that's when I realized if I wanted to protect my story, my cars, and everything they represented, I couldn't just say no. I had to prepare for war. The breaking point came faster than I expected. One Saturday afternoon, I was in my garage working on the Ferrari oil stains on my hands, the hum of the engine half soothing my nerves. For a few hours, I almost believed the chaos outside couldn't touch me. But then I heard tires crunching on the driveway. Natalie stepped out of her Civic, and she wasn't alone. Two strangers, polished, expensive-looking, the kind of people who smelled like money and entitlement, trailed behind her. Before I could even ask what she was doing there, she breezed past me with that familiar air of assumption. "These are my friends Keith and Samantha. They wanted to see the cars." My jaw dropped. "You can't just bring strangers here, Natalie." She rolled her eyes. "Don't be dramatic. Keith loves vintage Porsches. He might even be interested in buying one when you finally sell." Keith moved closer to the 911, hand outstretched as if he had every right to touch it. I stepped in front of him, my voice iron. "Don't touch anything. These are not for sale, and you're not welcome here." Samantha laughed, a high, tinkling sound that set my teeth on edge. "She said you were protective of your toys. Cute, really. Aren't you a little old to be this attached?" I clenched my fists. Toys. That word sliced deeper than they knew. To them, these cars were status symbols. To me, they were survival etched in chrome and steel. Natalie ran her fingers along the Aston Martin's surface, grinning. "Remember when you let me drive this one? I felt like a spy." My stomach turned cold. "I never let you drive the Aston. You begged once and I said no." She shrugged, unbothered. "Well, maybe it was another one. They all look the same to me." The casual dismissal, the total lack of respect, it was gasoline on fire. "Get out," I said, my voice low, shaking with anger. Natalie blinked, stunned, as if it had never occurred to her I'd actually throw her out. But we just got here. Now. Keith and Samantha shifted awkwardly, clearly realizing they'd walked into a war zone. They slunk back to the car. Natalie stormed out last, hurling one final grenade over her shoulder. "It doesn't matter. They'll all be mine soon enough. Dad says you'll come around." That chill in her voice, that certainty, it shook me. It wasn't a bluff, it was a plan. 2 days later, my fear was confirmed. Teresa, the real estate agent, showed up at my front door with Natalie in tow. She held a folder thick with documents. "Just need a few signatures," she said brightly. "We've found a buyer for the whole collection. It's a very fair offer." My blood ran cold. Natalie bounced behind her, grinning. "Isn't this great? No hassle. You can get it over with, and we'll close on the house next month." I blocked the doorway. "I haven't agreed to sell anything, and I never will. Leave." Teresa faltered, clearly rattled. "But your father told me this was a family decision." "My father has no authority over my property. Neither do you, and neither does Natalie." I slammed the door in their faces, heart pounding. That night, I went to grab the spare key I kept for the garage. The hook was empty. Panic clawed my chest. I pulled up the security camera footage. And there it was, my father and Natalie in broad daylight using a key to stroll into my garage. They wandered for nearly an hour, opening doors, taking photos, inventorying my collection. And then, clear as day, I heard my father's voice. Once Daniel comes to his senses, we'll need to move quickly. They weren't waiting for me to agree. They were preparing to act without me. I realized then this wasn't just pressure. It was invasion, a violation. They had crossed a line so deeply that the word family no longer applied. And if I didn't act soon, I'd lose everything. The night I decided to move the cars, it felt like planning a heist. Except I wasn't a thief. I was the owner trying to keep what was mine from people who thought bloodlines gave them the right to steal it. After watching the security footage of my father and Natalie wandering through my garage, talking about my cars like they were items on a shopping list, I called Jackson, the restoration expert from my car club, and one of the few people I trusted completely. I told him everything. He didn't hesitate. "You can't leave them there," he said, his voice low. "If they've already got a key, it's only a matter of time before they make their move. I've got warehouse space climate-controlled secure. We'll hide them until this blows over." A plan formed quickly. We'd move all 10 cars in one night under cover of darkness. Not in a convoy that would draw attention, but staggered each car, leaving every 5 minutes, taking different routes. Jackson would coordinate the logistics, recruit trusted drivers from the club people with experience handling rare vehicles. By the end of the call, we had a time midnight 2 nights later. The following day was a blur of preparation. I gathered every title, every receipt, every piece of documentation proving ownership. I wrote a formal letter revoking any permission my family may have once had to access my property. I even called a lawyer friend to confirm what I already knew. Legally, I was in the clear. But this wasn't about law anymore. It was about speed, secrecy, and survival. When midnight came, my driveway filled quietly with shadows, friends who believed in me enough to risk getting tangled in family drama. They parked their cars blocks away and walked to the house, slipping into the garage like ghosts. We stood together among the gleaming machines. Engines, silent, but poised chrome, reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights. For a moment, I almost couldn't move. My chest tightened as I looked at each one, the Mustang, the Porsche, the Corvette. Each car carried a story, a scar, a victory. And here I was preparing to spirit them away like contraband. Jackson broke the silence. Everyone knows their vehicle and their route. Phones silent, headsets on. We leave in 5-minute intervals. The Mustang goes first. The room buzzed with quiet focus. These weren't just drivers, they were guardians. They understood the gravity of what we were doing. At exactly midnight, the garage door opened and the first engine fired the Mustang, its rumble low and steady. George, a retired mechanic, slipped it into gear and rolled out into the night, headlights off, until he hit the street. One by one, the others followed, the Jaguar, the Porsche, the Ferrari. Each departure felt like a piece of my soul leaving with it. I stayed until the last two, the Lamborghini and the Dodge Viper. Jackson and I exchanged a look, no words needed. He took the Viper. I slid into the Lamborghini. The Countach roared to life, its engine far too loud for stealth, but there was no helping that. As I eased out of the driveway, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw my garage empty, hollow. A sight that both broke me and hardened me. The drive through the sleeping city was surreal. Every red light felt like a spotlight. Every passing car made my pulse race. But after 30 tense minutes, I pulled into the warehouse. And there they were, 9 cars already lined up, polished silhouettes under the dim industrial lights. Jackson arrived minutes later, the Viper's deep growl echoing through the bay, before cutting off. "All secure," he said, tossing me the new keys to the warehouse security system. "Only you and I have the code." I looked at my friends, people who had risked their own safety for me. "Thank you," I whispered, words too small for what I felt. They nodded. No explanations needed. They understood. When the last of them left, I stood in that warehouse surrounded by the 10 machines that told my story, and I felt a strange mix of grief and triumph. I'd lost something that night, the illusion that my family would ever respect me, but I'd gained something too, proof that I could protect myself, protect what I built. And deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a battle that was about to get uglier. At 7:30 the next morning, the phone rang. I knew it would. My father's voice came through like a whip. "What have you done with the cars, Daniel?" No greeting, no pause, just fury. I sipped my coffee, forcing calm. "They're safe," I said evenly, "and no one will be making decisions about them except me." His silence was sharp, then broke into sputtering rage. "You're acting like we're trying to steal from you. We're trying to help your sister build a stable life. Don't you understand? Family comes first." I clenched my jaw. Taking what I've worked 15 years to build isn't helping. It's theft. That set him off. He hurled every accusation he could find: selfish, materialistic, ungrateful. He told me I'd forgotten where I came from. I let him vent, then hung up. Minutes later, my mother called, her voice soaked in tears. "How could you do this to your sister? She was counting on that house. We already told the sellers we were interested. Do you know how embarrassing this is for us?" I shut my eyes. "You made promises on my behalf without my consent. That's on you, not me." She gasped as if I'd slapped her. "We thought you'd do the right thing." And then came Natalie's texts. Long, angry messages filled with profanity. "You've ruined my life. You destroyed my chance at happiness. You never cared about me." And then the final dagger: "Dad says we can sue you for the cars, since they belong to the family." That line made me laugh out loud, though it wasn't funny. I called Marcus, my lawyer friend, and read him the message. He didn't laugh, he snorted bitter. "They have absolutely no legal claim," he said. "But the fact that they believe they do, that's dangerous. It means they're prepared to escalate." 3 days later, a letter arrived from a law firm I'd never heard of. It was full of legal jargon, demanding the immediate return of family assets that had been improperly removed, citing an obligation to shared heritage and family welfare. Marcus skimmed it, shaking his head. Pure intimidation. No basis in law, but you need to respond. So we did. Our reply was short, sharp, and unambiguous. The vehicles were my sole property, legally purchased, titled in my name. Any attempt to claim otherwise would be met with legal action. I also revoked in writing any prior permission family members might have had to access my home or garage. Any further entry without consent would be considered trespassing. It was the hardest letter I'd ever sent, but also the most necessary. Natalie's reaction was predictable, voicemails alternating between sobbing manipulation and screaming rage. At one point, she threatened to call the police and report the cars as stolen. That line chilled me. Marcus didn't hesitate. "If she tries, it's a false report. We'll shut it down. But document everything." So I did. Every text, every voicemail, every threat, I saved them. My trust in my family had been shattered, and now I treated them like adversaries. Still, the barrage took its toll. The guilt trips, the pressure, the loneliness of standing alone against the people who were supposed to love me, it carved deep into me. At night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was heartless, wondering if they were right. But then I'd picture the Mustang, the Porsche, the Viper. I'd picture my grandfather handing me that first wrench, telling me I could bring broken things back to life. And I knew protecting what I had built wasn't selfish, it was survival. And yet, even as I drew legal boundaries, I sensed this war wasn't over. Because people who feel entitled don't stop when you say no. They just look for another way to take what isn't theirs. And I had no idea how far they'd be willing to go. After weeks of emotional whiplash, angry calls from my father, tear-soaked voicemails from my mother, and venomous texts from Natalie, I finally did something I never thought I'd do. I cut them off. One by one, I blocked numbers. Natalie's texts no longer lit up my phone. My parents' calls went straight to voicemail. I told Marcus, my lawyer friend, to handle any further family communication. It was brutal, like cauterizing a wound, but the constant barrage of manipulation had left me raw. I needed space, not just from them, but from the cycle I'd been trapped in my whole life. At first, the silence felt unbearable. Walking into my condo, the quiet was deafening. For years, I'd carried the weight of trying to hold my family together, trying to be the responsible one. Without that noise, I felt adrift, guilty even. But slowly, the quiet began to feel like something else: freedom. I poured myself back into my company, refocusing on projects I'd neglected during the chaos. I joined a support group for people dealing with toxic family dynamics. And for the first time in months, I started sleeping through the night. Meanwhile, with my financial lifeline severed, Natalie had no choice but to face the world on her own terms. I heard updates through my mother's cautious, clipped messages, fragments she couldn't resist sending even though I barely replied. She's working at a coffee shop now, one said, as though she expected me to be horrified. But I wasn't horrified. I was relieved. Natalie had taken a job at Java Junction, a trendy coffee shop downtown. She woke before dawn, pulled espresso shots, wiped tables. For the first time in her life, she was experiencing what real work felt like, the exhaustion, the repetition, the pride of earning her own paycheck. My mother's tone made it clear she saw it as beneath Natalie. But I knew better. Honest work wasn't beneath her. It was exactly what she'd needed all along. I didn't reach out right away. I stayed quiet, watching from a distance, giving her room to either collapse back into old patterns or grow into something new. And little by little, the reports shifted. She wasn't quitting after a week. She wasn't storming out after a fight with her boss. She was still there. Then came the text I didn't expect. It popped up one night from a number I didn't recognize. "Hey, it's Natalie. I got a new phone. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I'm sorry. For everything. I'm working at Java Junction now. If you ever want to talk coffees on me." I stared at the words, suspicious at first. No guilt trips, no demands, no talk of the cars or the house, just an apology and an invitation. For Natalie, that was revolutionary. I didn't respond right away. Days passed before I wrote back, "I need time," but I appreciate the message. Her reply came instantly. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here working a lot." There was even a joke in there, a hint of humility I'd never heard from her before. And I wondered, could this really be change? Or just another manipulation dressed in softer clothes? Still, something about her words lingered. Maybe by saying no, by finally protecting my boundaries, I'd given her the one thing no bailout, no handout, no house ever could, the chance to stand on her own feet. And as much as I wanted to believe in that possibility, I also knew better than to let my guard down completely. Because with family, especially my family hope and heartbreak, were always just a breath apart. But for the first time in years, I felt something new where Natalie was concerned. Not resentment, not anger, something closer to cautious hope. 2 weeks after Natalie's unexpected apology, I found myself standing outside Java Junction, the coffee shop she now called her workplace. The air smelled of roasted beans and early morning dew, and for the first time in months, I felt nervous. Not the boardroom kind of nervous, not even the kind that came before signing million-dollar deals. This was deeper, messier, family nervous. Through the window, I spotted her behind the counter. Hair tied back in a ponytail green apron, snug against her frame, moving with a focus I'd never seen before. She wasn't lounging. She wasn't scrolling on her phone. She was working, taking orders, pulling espresso shots, wiping counters. My throat tightened. When she noticed me, she didn't run over or cause a scene. She just gave a small wave, almost shy, and finished serving a customer before asking her manager for a break. She walked over slowly, carrying a latte. "Oat milk extra shot vanilla," she said, placing it in front of me. I blinked. You remembered. Her laugh was quiet, genuine, stripped of the old dramatics. Some things stick. We sat across from each other, the table between us feeling like a gulf and a bridge at once. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I offered, "You look good. The job suits you." She snorted. "My feet hate me. I've spilled more drinks than I care to admit. And my latte art looks like crime scenes. But it's honest work. First paycheck came last week. I didn't ask anyone for help." Her eyes lowered, almost embarrassed. That's new for me. Hearing her say it out loud without excuses shook me. This was not the Natalie who stormed out of my garage declaring my cars would be hers. This was someone different. Still, skepticism clung to me. "So what changed?" I asked carefully. Her fingers twisted a napkin as she spoke. "When you moved the cars, it was like a slap I couldn't ignore. Mom and Dad had promised me a house, told me you'd cave, and then you didn't. They were humiliated. And I realized, God, I'd spent my whole life blaming everyone else. Why I couldn't keep a job. Why I was broke. Why nothing worked out. It was always someone else's fault. But when you took away the safety net, there was no one left to blame but me." I sat there stunned. I'd prepared for manipulation, for crocodile tears, for another scheme, but not for this, not for raw honesty. She went on, voice soft but steady. "The first week here was hell. Customers yelling over the wrong syrup, managers breathing down my neck. My back hurt, my hands shook. But then I got my paycheck, money I earned, not borrowed, not begged. and for the first time I felt proud. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Her 15-minute break stretched into 20 as she told me stories of rude customers, of small victories, of learning how to budget, so her rent was paid on time for the first time in years. Every word chipped away at my doubt, though I kept my guard up. I had to. Before she left to return behind the counter, she looked me in the eye. I don't expect you to trust me overnight. I don't even expect you to forgive me, but I want to try. Coffee's on me next time, too. I watched her slip her apron back on and dive into the rush of customers, her movements clumsy but determined. For the first time in a long time, I saw my sister not as the spoiled child or the entitled adult, but as a woman learning to stand on her own legs. And for the first time in years, I let myself feel something dangerous, hope. But could I really trust it? Could I believe that change had finally come? Or was this just another chapter in a cycle I thought I'd already broken? Nearly a year after that midnight move, I found myself standing once again in my garage. But this time the space wasn't empty. Every car was back, gleaming under new security lights. Engines tuned, chrome polished. The Mustang, the Jaguar, the Porsche, they were home. Yet they didn't just represent milestones anymore. They represented a line I had drawn, a boundary I had fought to keep. Rebuilding a relationship with my family wasn't as simple as turning a key in an ignition. It started small, brief, awkward dinners on neutral ground rules firmly in place. My cars, my company, my finances off limits, non-negotiable. The first meeting was tense. My father bristled at the boundaries. My mother's eyes flickered with guilt and resistance. Old habits die hard. But Natalie surprised me. She didn't roll her eyes or pout. She didn't beg for handouts. She listened. And when Dad pushed, "Why can't you just let her stay with you a while?" she was the one who shook her head. "No, Dad. I need to do this myself." That single sentence hit harder than any apology could. For years she had leaned on everyone else, and now she was defending her independence. Weeks turned into months, and a new rhythm formed. Natalie still worked at Java Junction, but she'd been promoted to shift supervisor. She paid her own rent, even furnishing her small apartment with secondhand finds. She refinished herself. She'd enrolled in evening classes in business administration, her dream now to one day run a cafe of her own. The first time she volunteered at my annual charity car show, I watched her greet guests, manage registrations, and hustle with an energy I never thought possible. When the event ended, she walked through the garage with me, pausing in front of the Porsche 911. She laid a hand, gently, on the hood. "I get it now," she whispered. "Why these mean so much to you. They're not just cars. They're your story." That acknowledgement, the respect I'd craved for years, was worth more than any house or apology. Of course, things with my parents weren't magically healed. My father still struggled with the idea that he couldn't dictate my choices. My mother still tried to tug at emotional strings, but I had changed. I no longer bent to guilt or threats. My no now carried weight. And with time they began to adjust slowly, awkwardly, but undeniably. Here's the truth I learned. Setting boundaries isn't cruelty. It's clarity. It's saying, this is who I am, this is what I've built, and this is where I end and you begin. And sometimes those boundaries don't just protect us, they force others to grow. If I had sold my collection that night, if I had handed Natalie a house bought with my sweat, she would never have faced herself. She would never have discovered the pride of a paycheck, the discipline of real work, or the satisfaction of standing on her own. By saying no, I gave her something far more valuable than a roof. I gave her the chance to change. And me, I kept more than my cars. I kept my story, my freedom, my identity. So now when I walk through my garage, I see more than polished chrome. I see proof. Proof that I had the courage to protect what mattered even when everyone told me I was selfish. Proof that standing firm isn't the opposite of love, it's sometimes the deepest kind of love there is. And if you've ever been pushed to the edge, told to give up what you built, because family comes first, I want you to remember this. Protecting your boundaries isn't betrayal, it's survival. And sometimes it's the only way others learn to stand on their own. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever had to stand your ground against impossible pressure, don't just keep it to yourself. Share it. Like this video, subscribe for more, and check out the next story, where I reveal how another boundary I set ended up saving not just me, but someone I love. Because trust me, once you learn the power of saying no, your entire life changes. Looking back now, the whole ordeal feels like standing in the middle of a storm chaos. Swirling voices, demanding guilt pressing down like rain. But storms don't last forever. They clear, and what's left is clarity. I learned that boundaries are not walls, they are doors. And the locks on those doors are ours to control. For years, I thought saying no was selfish, that loving my family meant sacrificing my own dreams. But love without respect isn't love, it's control. When I finally refused, when I protected what I had built, I discovered something I never expected, that no could be the very thing that set us all free. Natalie, stripped of the safety nets we kept throwing under her, learned to walk on her own. My parents, forced to face the reality that they couldn't dictate every decision, began slowly to see me not as a child, but as an adult with the right to choose. And me, I rediscovered peace. Every engine rumble in my garage is no longer just a symbol of the past. It's a reminder of courage of the night. I decided to protect my story. And that's what I want you to take from this. Whether it's family, friends, or colleagues, if you're ever pushed to give up your identity, your passion, or your hard-won victories, remember, protecting them is not betrayal. It is the deepest form of self-respect. Sometimes the hardest stand is not against enemies, but against those we love most. And sometimes the bravest act is refusing to let them break what you've built. So protect your story, guard your boundaries, and never forget the things you create with your own hands and heart are always worth defending.